The chains around Daisy Lane's wrists felt like ice against her skin as the Montana sun beat down mercilessly on the auction block. August 1877 had brought nothing but misfortune since the stagecoach attack that left her captured and sold into bondage. Beside her stood another woman, Eleanor Wright, whose proud posture belied the fear in her eyes as they faced the crowd of ruthless men bidding on human lives as casually as cattle. The auctioneer's voice rang out across the dusty square of Copper Creek. Two fine women. One educated as a schoolteacher, the other trained in domestic arts. Bidding starts at $50 for the pair. Daisy's stomach twisted as men called out prices, their eyes hungry and intentions transparent. Her gaze darted desperately across the sea of faces until it landed on a tall figure at the back. Unlike the others, he wasn't shouting or leering. His expression was unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat, but something about his stillness made her heart quicken with a different kind of fear. $100, came a shout from a man whose reputation for cruelty preceded him. $150, called another, a saloon owner known for working women to death. The tall stranger stepped forward then, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. $500, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. The auctioneer's eyes widened. $500 from Mr. Colton Shaw. Any other bids? When silence answered him, he brought down his gavel with finality. Sold both women to Mr. Shaw. As the crowd dispersed in disappointment, Colton approached the auction block. Up close, Daisy could see his face clearly weathered by sun and wind, but younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30. His eyes, a startling blue against his tanned skin, assessed them with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Let's go," he said simply, paying the auctioneer before leading them away, their chains still binding them together. Eleanor spoke first as they followed him down the street. "Where are you taking us, sir?" He didn't look back as he answered, "My ranch, about a day's ride from here." Daisy exchanged glances with Eleanor. A day's ride meant isolation, meant they'd be at this stranger's mercy with no chance of escape. "What do you intend for us?" Daisy asked, her voice barely steady. He stopped then, turning to face them. "My housekeeper died last month. Ranch needs tending. You'll have your own quarters, meals, and fair treatment." His eyes met Daisy's directly. Nothing more will be expected than honest work. Relief washed through her, though caution remained. Men's promises came cheap in these parts. At the livery stable, Colton spoke briefly with the owner before returning with 3 horses. He removed their shackles with a key he'd received from the auctioneer, the metal falling away to reveal raw, reddened skin beneath. "Can you both ride?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, but Daisy hesitated. "It's been years since I was on a horse." Colton's expression softened slightly. "You'll ride with me then." The journey began in silence, the town of Copper Creek fading behind them as they rode into the vast expanse of Montana territory. Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks still snow-capped despite the summer heat. Colton led the way, with Daisy seated before him on his sturdy chestnut gelding and Eleanor following on a gentle mare. "Why did you buy us both?" Daisy finally asked, the question that had been burning since the auction. There was a long pause before he answered. "Couldn't leave either of you to those men, seen what happens." His simple answer surprised her. "That's a lot of money for charity, Mr. Shaw." "Colton," he corrected. "And it's not charity, ranch needs help, been running it alone since Pa died." As the day wore on, Daisy became increasingly aware of Colton's presence behind her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the strength in the arm that occasionally steadied her when the terrain grew rough. Despite her circumstances, she found herself relaxing against him, exhaustion overcoming weariness. By late afternoon, they crested a hill and Colton reined in his horse. "Shaw Ranch," he said, gesturing to the valley below. The sight took Daisy's breath away. A sturdy 2-story house stood surrounded by several outbuildings, a corral and vast fenced pastures where cattle grazed. A creek wound through the property, lined with cottonwoods that provided welcome shade. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Been in the family 3 generations," he replied, and she detected a note of pride in his voice. They rode down to the house, where Colton helped both women dismount. Daisy's legs nearly buckled after the long journey, and Colton's strong hands caught her elbows, steadying her. Their eyes met briefly before he stepped back. "Come inside," he said, leading them toward the house. "You must be hungry." The interior was surprisingly well kept for a bachelor's residence, though plainly furnished. A large kitchen with a cast-iron stove occupied most of the ground floor, along with a dining area and sitting room with a stone fireplace. "Bedrooms are upstairs," Colton explained. "You'll share the one at the end of the hall. Mine's downstairs." He seemed to want to reassure them they'd have their privacy. "Do you live here alone?" Eleanor asked as she glanced around. "Just me and the ranch hands. They have quarters in the bunkhouse." He moved to the stove, stoking the fire. Hungry, both women nodded, and Daisy stepped forward. "I can cook if you'd like to rest. It's the least we can do." Colton regarded her for a moment. "There's beans and salt pork in the pantry. Fresh bread, too, from yesterday." While Daisy prepared the meal, Eleanor explored the kitchen, familiarizing herself with its organization. Colton sat at the table, removing his hat to reveal thick brown hair in need of a trim. He watched them work with a curious expression, as if uncertain how to behave with women in his home. Over dinner, they learned more about Shaw Ranch. 50 head of cattle, a small but profitable operation. 3 ranch hands who helped with the livestock, crops for personal use, a life that was demanding but stable. "What were your lives before?" Colton asked, his first personal question. Eleanor spoke first. "I was a seamstress in Denver. My husband died of typhoid last year. I was traveling to Oregon to live with my sister when our stagecoach was attacked." Daisy set down her fork. "I was a school teacher in St. Louis, came west to take a position in Helena, same stagecoach as Eleanor." "The Blackwater Gang," Colton said, his expression darkening. "They've been raiding stagecoaches for months. Territorial marshals can't catch them." "You know of them?" Daisy asked. He nodded grimly. "Everyone does. They're getting bolder, starting to attack homesteads too." After dinner, Colton showed them to their room, modest but clean, with 2 narrow beds, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the mountains. He placed a lamp on the bedside table and stepped back awkwardly. "There's water in the pitcher. Outhouse is behind the kitchen. I'll find you some clean clothes tomorrow." He paused at the door. "Lock's on your side. Good night." After he left, Daisy and Eleanor looked at each other in the lamplight. "What do you make of him?" Eleanor whispered. Daisy shook her head. "I don't know yet. But I think we're safer here than we would have been with anyone else at that auction." "That's not saying much," Eleanor replied, but there was less fear in her voice now. They took turns washing, grateful for the clean water after days of captivity. The beds, though simple, felt like luxury after sleeping on the hard ground. Despite her exhaustion, Daisy lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night, the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional whinnying of horses, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. She thought of Colton Shaw, his unexpected kindness, the gentleness of his hands when he'd helped her from the horse, the way his eyes had briefly softened when she thanked him for dinner. Not at all what she'd expected from a man who'd purchased them at auction. Morning came with the crowing of roosters and the scent of coffee drifting up from below. Daisy and Eleanor dressed quickly in the same clothes they'd worn yesterday and made their way downstairs to find Colton already up, frying bacon at the stove. "Good morning," he said, glancing up. "Coffee's hot." They fell into a rhythm over the next few days. Daisy took charge of the cooking and helped Eleanor with the cleaning. The house, which had clearly suffered from a woman's absence, began to shine under their care. Colton worked from dawn until dusk with his ranch hands but returned each evening for dinner, gradually becoming more talkative. A week after their arrival, Colton brought home a package from town. "Clothes," he explained, setting it on the table, "and some other things you might need." Inside, they found several simple but well-made dresses, undergarments, nightgowns, and personal items like hairbrushes and ribbons. Such thoughtfulness was unexpected, and Daisy found herself blinking back tears. "Thank you," she said softly. "This is very generous." Colton looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just practical. Can't have you wearing the same clothes forever." That evening, freshly bathed and dressed in a new blue calico dress, Daisy found Colton on the porch, smoking a cigarette as he watched the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. She hesitated in the doorway, struck by the picture he made tall and strong against the backdrop of his land, his profile sharp in the fading light. "May I join you?" she asked. He turned, his expression changing subtly as he took in her appearance. "Of course." She settled on the porch swing, smoothing her skirt. "It's beautiful here." "Always thought so." He tapped ash from his cigarette. "Different from St. Louis, I expect. Very, but in a good way." She studied his face in the golden light. "Colton, I've been meaning to ask. How long do you expect us to work for you, to repay what you spent?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Hadn't really thought about it that way." He considered for a moment. "You're free to go whenever you want. I won't keep you here against your will." Now it was Daisy's turn to be surprised. "You mean we're not indentured to you?" He shook his head. "That's not why I bought you, told you couldn't leave you to those men, but $500. Money's not as important as doing right." He put out his cigarette. "If you want to leave, I can take you to Helena when I go to sell cattle next month, or you can stay on with wages." The offer stunned her. Freedom had seemed an impossible dream just a week ago. "You'd pay us, after what you spent." His eyes met hers, serious and direct. "Everyone deserves fair treatment, Miss Lane." "Daisy," she corrected softly. "And thank you." The days began to take on a pleasant routine. Daisy found herself watching for Colton's return each evening, enjoying their conversations that gradually extended beyond ranch matters. She learned he'd been born on this land, had briefly attended university in Denver before his mother's illness called him home, and had run the ranch alone since his father's death 3 years ago. In turn, she told him about her life in St. Louis, her dreams of adventure that had brought her west, her love of books and learning. He listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that revealed an educated mind behind his cowboy exterior. One evening, a month after their arrival, Colton returned with news from town. "Territorial Marshal caught 2 members of the Blackwater gang," he announced over dinner. "They're standing trial in Helena next week." Eleanor gasped. "Will we need to testify?" "Marshal might ask you to," Colton replied. "I told him you were here, hoped that was all right." Daisy nodded, though the thought of facing her captors made her stomach clench. "Of course, we want justice." Later that night, unable to sleep, Daisy went downstairs for a glass of water and found Colton still awake, reading by lamplight in the sitting room. He looked up at her footsteps. Closing his book, she was surprised to see it was a volume of Tennyson's poetry. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head, wrapping her shawl tighter around her nightgown. The news about the trial brought back memories. Colton nodded in understanding. "Sit," he offered, gesturing to the chair across from him. When she did, he asked gently, "Do you want to talk about what happened?" No one had asked her that before. The words came slowly at first, then in a rush the terror of the attack, watching the driver and guard being shot, the days of captivity before being sold at auction. Colton listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "I'm sorry that happened to you," he said when she finished, his voice rough with emotion. "No one should suffer such treatment." "Why did you really buy us, Colton?" she asked suddenly. "The truth." He was silent for a long moment. "My sister," he finally said. "She was taken by raiders 3 years ago. We never found her." His hands tightened on the book. "When I saw you 2 on that block, I thought of her, couldn't walk away." The revelation changed something between them. Daisy reached out impulsively, covering his hand with hers. "I'm sorry about your sister." His fingers curled around hers, warm and strong. "Thank you for telling me your story." They sat like that for several minutes, connected by touch and shared understanding, before Daisy reluctantly withdrew her hand. "I should try to sleep." "Good night, Daisy," he said softly, watching her rise. "Good night, Colton." The trip to Helena for the trial came the following week. The journey took 2 days by wagon, with an overnight stay at a small inn where Colton insisted on paying for proper rooms for the women. The territorial courthouse was crowded when they arrived, many eager to see justice served against the notorious gang. Daisy's testimony was brief but difficult, forcing her to relive the worst days of her life. Throughout her ordeal on the witness stand, she focused on Colton, who sat in the front row, his steady gaze giving her strength. When it was over, he met her outside, offering a clean handkerchief for her tears and a strong arm to lean on. "You did well," he said quietly. Very brave. The trial concluded with guilty verdicts and sentences of hanging. Outside the courthouse, the territorial marshal approached them. "Miss Lane, Miss Wright," he said, tipping his hat. "I wanted to thank you personally for your testimony. We're still hunting the rest of the gang, but this is a good start." "Will you find the others?" Eleanor asked. "We'll do our best, madam." The marshal glanced at Colton. "Shaw, good to see you again. How's the ranch managing?" Colton replied. "Better since these ladies arrived." The marshal's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. Well, they're fortunate you were at that auction. Not many men would have done what you did." That evening, they celebrated the verdict with dinner at Helena's finest restaurant. Colton had brought his good clothes, a dark suit that transformed him from rugged rancher to handsome gentleman. Daisy wore one of her new dresses, a deep green that brought out the gold in her hair. "A toast," Colton said, raising his glass, "to justice and new beginnings." "To new beginnings," Daisy echoed, meeting his eyes over her glass. The journey back to the ranch seemed different somehow. The landscape was the same, vast prairies giving way to foothills and mountains, but Daisy saw it with new eyes, not as a captive being taken to an unknown fate, but as someone returning home. The realization startled her. When had Shaw Ranch begun to feel like home? Summer gave way to autumn, painting the cottonwoods gold and bringing crisp mornings and early frosts. The cattle roundup kept Colton busy, but he always returned for dinner, sometimes bringing wildflowers he'd found on the range. Daisy placed them in a jar on the kitchen table, treasuring these small tokens of thoughtfulness. Eleanor had begun teaching Daisy to sew, and together they worked on winter clothes, including a warm shirt for Colton. His genuine delight when they presented it to him warmed Daisy's heart more than she cared to admit. One evening in late October, Colton returned from town with mail including a letter for Eleanor from her sister in Oregon. Her hands trembled as she read it. "She still wants me to come," Eleanor said, looking up with mixed emotions. "She's sent money for the stage fare." Daisy felt a pang of sadness at the thought of losing her friend, but squeezed Eleanor's hand supportively. "That's wonderful news." Colton nodded, though his expression was similarly conflicted. "Next supply run to town is in 2 days. Stage comes through on Thursdays." Later, as Daisy helped Eleanor pack her few belongings, her friend watched her with knowing eyes. "You've fallen in love with him, haven't you?" Eleanor asked softly, Daisy's hands stilled on the folded dress. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," Eleanor smiled gently. "I've seen how you look at each other when you think no one's watching. He saved us, that's all." But even as she said it, Daisy knew it wasn't true. Somewhere between that auction block and now, Colton Shaw had claimed not just her freedom, but her heart. "He's a good man," Eleanor said. "Better than most. Don't let fear keep you from happiness, Daisy." The day Eleanor left brought the first snowfall, fat flakes drifting down as they said their goodbyes at the stagecoach stop in town. Promises to write were exchanged, along with tearful embraces, before the stage carried Eleanor away toward her new life. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, Daisy lost in thought about her own future. Without Eleanor, would Colton still want her to stay? Should she take her saved wages and start fresh elsewhere before these feelings for him grew any stronger? "You're welcome to follow her if you want," Colton said suddenly, breaking the silence. "To Oregon or back to St. Louis or anywhere." She looked at him, surprised by the tension in his voice. "Do you want me to leave?" His hands tightened on the reins. "No. But I don't want you staying out of obligation either. What if I stay because I want to?" The words came out before she could reconsider them. Colton reined the horses to a stop, turning to face her fully. Snow caught in his hair and on the shoulders of his coat as he studied her face. "Do you want to stay?" Her heart hammered in her chest. "Yes, I do." Something changed in his expression, hope warring with caution. "Why?" It was the moment to be brave, to risk everything. "Because in the strangest way, being purchased at that auction was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because it brought me here, to this ranch, to you." Colton's breath came out in a white cloud in the cold air. "Daisy, he stopped, struggling for words. "I never expected to feel this way again. After losing my family, I thought I was meant to be alone. And now," she whispered. "Now I can't imagine this place without you in it." He reached for her hand, his touch warm despite the cold. I know it hasn't been long and your circumstances coming here were terrible, but sometimes life gives us unexpected gifts, she finished for him, squeezing his hand. The kiss, when it came, was gentle at first, a question asked and answered in the brush of lips. Then deeper, a promise exchanged as snow fell around them, blanketing the world in white silence. Winter on the ranch brought its own challenges and joys. Blizzards that kept them housebound for days, sitting before the fire reading aloud from Colton's collection of books. Clear, frigid nights when the stars seemed close enough to touch, viewed from the porch wrapped in blankets and each other's arms. Holidays celebrated simply but meaningfully, with decorations made by hand and special meals that filled the house with delicious aromas. Their courtship progressed slowly, respectfully. Colton was determined that Daisy should never feel pressured or obligated. He continued to pay her wages, insisting she build her own savings so she would always have choices. But as winter deepened, so did their connection, conversations lasting long into the night as they shared dreams and fears, hopes and memories. January brought news that the remaining members of the Blackwater gang had been captured or killed in a shootout with marshals. The letter from the territorial office brought a sense of closure. The final chapter of the nightmare that had brought them together now ended. "I never thanked you properly," Daisy said that night as they sat before the fire, "for what you did that day." Colton shook his head. "No need for thanks." "There is, though." She took his hand, tracing the calluses earned from years of hard work. "You risked everything for strangers. Spent money you probably couldn't spare. Best investment I ever made," he said with a small smile. She laughed softly. "Is that what I am? An investment?" His expression grew serious as he lifted her hand to his lips. "You're everything, Daisy, everything I never knew I needed." February brought a Chinook, a warm wind that melted the snow temporarily and allowed for a trip to town. While Daisy shopped for supplies, Colton disappeared on an errand of his own. He returned with a small package wrapped in brown paper, which he tucked into his coat without explanation. That evening, after dinner, he asked her to join him on the porch despite the returning cold. The moon was full, casting silver light across the snow-covered landscape, mountains standing like sentinels against the star-filled sky. "I've been thinking," Colton began, his breath visible in the cold air, "about that day at the auction." Daisy looked at him curiously. "What about it? I claimed you then because I couldn't bear to see what would happen if I didn't." He turned to face her fully. "But now I'm asking, hoping that you might claim me too, not out of gratitude or obligation, but because you choose to." From his pocket he drew the small package, unwrapping it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. "She made me promise to give it only to someone I couldn't imagine living without." Daisy's breath caught as he dropped to one knee in the snow. "Daisy Lane, will you marry me? Make this ranch our home, build a life here together." Tears blurred her vision as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then, finding her voice, "Yes, yes, Colton Shaw, I will marry you." The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit. When he rose and gathered her into his arms, she felt not like property claimed, but like a woman who had found her place in the world, freely chosen, deeply loved. They married in April, when the wildflowers carpeted the meadows and new calves frolicked in the pastures. The ceremony was small but joyful, held on the ranch with a traveling preacher officiating. Eleanor returned from Oregon for the occasion, bringing her sister and brother-in-law. The ranch hands cleaned up impressively for the celebration, and even the territorial marshal attended, bringing news that the stagecoach company had located some of the passengers' belongings, including Daisy's treasured books. As they spoke their vows beneath an arch of spring blossoms, Daisy reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from terror to safety, from captivity to freedom, from loneliness to love. When Colton slid the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, she saw not the man who had raised his hand at an auction block, but the one who had offered his heart with no conditions or expectations. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing in the barn cleared for the occasion. As twilight deepened, Colton led Daisy away from the festivities, walking hand in hand to a small rise overlooking the ranch. Happy. he asked, his arms encircling her waist as they watched the last light fade from the mountains. More than I ever thought possible, she answered truthfully, leaning back against his chest. Do you remember what the marshal said at our wedding, about fate having strange ways? Colton nodded, his chin brushing the top of her head. He meant how something as terrible as your capture led to us finding each other. Yes, she turned in his arms to face him, but I think it's more than that. I think sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead us exactly where we're meant to be, if we're brave enough to keep going. And where are you meant to be, Mrs. Shaw? He asked, a smile in his voice. She reached up to touch his face, memorizing its beloved contours in the gathering darkness. Right here, with you, for all the days to come. Their kiss sealed the promise as stars appeared overhead, witnesses to a love born in the most unlikely circumstances, stronger for the trials that forged it, a testament to the healing power of kindness and the enduring strength of hearts that choose each other freely, day after day. In the years that followed, Shaw Ranch flourished under their joint care. Children came first, a daughter with Colton's blue eyes and Daisy's golden hair, then twin boys who inherited their father's height and their mother's love of books. The house expanded to accommodate the growing family, and Daisy started a small school for the children of neighboring ranches. Sometimes, on summer evenings when the work was done, they would sit together on the porch, watching their children play beneath the cottonwoods. In those quiet moments, with Colton's hand warm in hers, Daisy would remember that dusty auction block, the chains around her wrists, and the tall stranger whose raised hand had forever changed her destiny. From ownership to partnership, from fear to trust, from two strangers thrown together by circumstance to a family bound by love, theirs was a journey neither could have imagined on that fateful day. Yet in each other, they had found not just rescue but redemption, not just shelter but home.